Dr. Amanda Hayes gripped the edge of her station as the crystalline being towered over the human delegation. Her knuckles turned white, but she kept her face carefully neutral. 6 years of studying first contact protocols hadn't prepared her for this level of humiliation. These mammals show basic pattern recognition. The Scytheri representative chimed, their crystalline form refracting light across the chamber in what she'd learned was their version of patronizing amusement. Perhaps they can be trained for simple tasks. The translation device on Amanda's wrist rendered the words in childlike English, complete with simplified grammar and limited vocabulary. She'd specifically requested the raw language feed, but the Scytheri had insisted their optimized version was more appropriate for human comprehension. Admiral Chen, the head of Earth's delegation, maintained his diplomatic smile. "We appreciate your consideration," he said, each word carefully measured. "However, humanity has much to offer the galactic community. Our scientific achievements." A harmonic ripple passed through the assembled Scytheri, their crystal bodies vibrating in what Amanda had started to recognize as laughter. But something about the frequency caught her attention. The overtones didn't match their standard communication patterns. The mammal's attempt abstract thought. Another Scytheri resonated. How charming. Like watching lesser primates stack blocks. Amanda's eyes narrowed as she focused on the untranslated frequencies. There was something familiar about the mathematical structure, something that reminded her of the Sanskrit texts she'd studied during her doctorate. The relationship between the harmonics followed a pattern similar to ancient Indo-European phonological rules. Perhaps, the first Scytheri continued, we should demonstrate real science. They generated a complex series of overlapping tones that caused a nearby metal sphere to levitate and transform into an intricate geometric pattern. The human delegation gasped appropriately, but Amanda barely noticed the display. She was too busy recording the underlying frequencies with her modified translator. The Scytheri's casual demonstration had used a different linguistic structure than their regular speech, one that bore striking similarities to certain mathematical properties found in Earth's oldest known languages. As you can see, the Scytheri representative chimed condescendingly, there is quite a gap between our civilizations. We will, of course, accept your people as protected subordinates. Under our guidance, you may eventually develop beyond your current limitations. Admiral Chen's smile finally cracked. With all due respect, we came here as equals seeking. Equals. The crystal being's surface fractured into prismatic patterns. Your species still uses verbal communication. You rely on crude symbolic logic. Your very language is built on animal grunts and emotional approximations. We developed beyond such primitive methods millennia ago. But Amanda had stopped listening to the translation. In the raw harmonics, she caught something extraordinary. When the Scytheri discussed advanced concepts, their language became less complex, not more. It was as if they were using simplified approximations of something far more sophisticated. Dr. Hayes. Admiral Chen's voice cut through her concentration. Do you have anything to add from a linguistic perspective? Amanda rose slowly, her mind racing. She could point out what she'd noticed, could challenge their assumptions right now. But the pattern in her data was still too new, too uncertain, and something told her that revealing her discovery prematurely would be dangerous. No, Admiral, she said instead, adopting the subservient tone the Scytheri seemed to expect. Their language is beyond my current understanding. The crystalline beings vibrated in satisfaction, but Amanda wasn't finished. She activated her modified translator and added, I would be grateful for the opportunity to study your archives, to better serve our new guides. The Scytheri representative's surface rippled with pleasure at her apparent submission. See, they can be taught. Very well, Dr. Hayes. You will be given limited access to our historical records. Perhaps your study of them will help your species accept its proper place in the galaxy. As the meeting concluded, and the human delegation filed out in barely concealed shame, Amanda clutched her data recorder. The Scytheri had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed humanity's primitive languages were a weakness, but she was starting to suspect they were about to learn just how wrong that assumption was. 3 weeks into her privileged access to the Scytheri archives, Amanda's office had become a cave of holographic displays and scattered data crystals. She'd given up sleep 2 days ago, sustained only by military-grade stimulants, and the growing certainty that she was on the verge of something extraordinary. Your dedication to basic learning is admirable, the monitoring drone chimed, as it made its hourly pass. Though perhaps excessive for your level of comprehension. Amanda didn't bother responding. She'd learned that the drones reported everything back to their supervisors, and right now, she needed to maintain her image as the eager but limited human scholar. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the frequency analysis of 1,000 years of recorded Scytheri speech. The pattern was undeniable. With each century, their language had become more streamlined, more efficient, and significantly less complex. The modern Scytheri used only about 30% of the harmonic range their ancestors had commanded. Still awake, mammal? Amanda jumped. She hadn't heard Kavor enter. The young Scytheri scientist moved more quietly than most of their kind. Their crystalline form was smaller than average, with an unusual bluish tint that other Scytheri seemed to find unfashionable. "Just trying to understand your superior ways," Amanda said, making sure the drone could hear the proper amount of submission in her voice. But her eyes met Kavor's central facet in their private signal, a warning that she needed to talk. Kavor's surface rippled in what appeared to be dismissive amusement, but Amanda caught the subtle harmonic that meant they've understood. "Perhaps you need a break. I could demonstrate some simple scientific principles in the lower laboratory." The lower laboratory was one of the few places without drone coverage, supposedly because the crystalline walls interfered with surveillance. Amanda had her doubts about that explanation, but she wasn't going to question their luck. "That would be most educational," she said, following Kavor down the spiraling crystal staircase. As soon as they were alone, Kavor's entire form shifted from its usual rigid pattern to something more fluid. "You found something." Amanda nodded, pulling out her modified translator. "Look at this. I've been analyzing the historical recordings, and there's a clear degradation in linguistic complexity over time. But here's the really interesting part." She highlighted a particular sequence. "When your people do higher mathematics or advanced physics, they're actually using fragments of an older, more complex language without realizing it." Kavor's surface fractured in distress. That would explain things. The problems we've been having. Problems. The young scientist's voice dropped to almost subsonic frequencies. "It's not just me. Many of the younger generation have been struggling with certain types of abstract reasoning. The elders say we're just undisciplined, but they generated a complex harmonic that made Amanda's teeth ache. That was a simple fifth-dimensional equation. A century ago, every schoolchild could do it. Now, most of us can barely grasp the concept." Amanda's heart raced. "Kavor, I need access to your oldest records. The ones from before the Great Optimization. Those are restricted." Kavor vibrated nervously. "The Council says they're too primitive to be of value." "But don't you see, they're not primitive at all. I think your ancestors had a far more sophisticated understanding of reality, one that got lost when your people streamlined their language for AI integration." Kavor was silent for a long moment, their crystal surface showing complex interference patterns. "The archives you're asking about, they're in the deepest vault. Even I'm not supposed to know they exist. My parent crystal was a keeper before they trailed off." Amanda reached out, nearly touching Kavor's surface before remembering the taboo. "I'm sorry about your parent crystal. But this could be important, not just for understanding your history, but for your future. If we're caught, Kavor began, we won't be. Amanda pulled up another analysis on her translator. Look at this. It's a comparison between ancient Scatheri harmonics and Proto-Indo-European tonal patterns. They're nearly identical. Somehow, humanity preserved something your people lost. If we can recover it. Kavor's form suddenly stiffened. Someone's coming. Their voice returned to its official frequencies. And that mammal is why crystal geometry is superior to your primitive carbon structures. As footsteps echoed down the stairwell, Amanda quickly tucked away her translator. Fascinating, she said loudly. I never realized how limited our material science was, but her mind was racing with possibilities. If she was right about the ancient archives, everything was about to change. The only question was whether they'd live long enough to see it. The deepest vault of the Scatheri archives resembled a cathedral built from living crystal. Amanda's breath caught as she and Kavor descended the final staircase. The walls pulsed with faint luminescence, creating patterns that seemed to follow their movement. We have 11 minutes before the security grid resets, Kavor hummed, their crystal form vibrating with nervous energy. The old records are in the central chamber. Amanda checked her modified translator one last time. They'd spent 3 days reprogramming it to mask their biosignatures from the vault's sensors. If it failed now, the best they could hope for was immediate arrest. The central chamber opened before them like the inside of a geode. Ancient data crystals lined the walls, their surfaces dulled with age. Amanda's hand trembled as she connected her translator to the nearest crystal interface. Warning, Kavor chimed softly. These records, they might be encrypted in ways we can't. The crystal blazed to life, flooding the chamber with harmonics so complex they made Amanda's vision blur. Her translator struggled to process the input, its display flickering with overlapping patterns of light. By the first song, Kavor's voice cracked with shock. I've never heard language with this many layers. Amanda could barely breathe. The mathematical structure she'd glimpsed in modern Scatheri was just the surface. Their ancestors had developed a method of communication that operated on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Look at this, she whispered, highlighting a sequence. They're not just describing higher dimensions. They're actually manipulating spacetime through harmonic resonance. The words aren't just symbols. They're tools for directly affecting reality. Kavor's surface showed fractal patterns of distress. But this means everything we were taught about our evolution, about streamlining our language for efficiency. It was a lie, Amanda finished. Or maybe a mistake. Your people didn't evolve beyond complex language. You lost something fundamental. She accessed another crystal, this one containing historical records from the period of the Great Optimization. The truth emerged in fragments. A well-intentioned project to make Scatheri language more compatible with early artificial intelligence systems. They'd simplify their communication patterns to help the AIs learn faster. 9 minutes, Kavor warned, but their own attention was fixed on a particular record. Amanda, look at these medical reports from the transition period. The data painted a disturbing picture. With each generation that used the simplified language, the Scatheri lost more of their ability to perceive and manipulate higher dimensions. Their crystal forms, once capable of impossible geometries, became more rigid, more limited. That's why the Council keeps these records hidden. Kavor vibrated with growing anger. We're not more evolved than our ancestors. You're experiencing cultural aphasia, Amanda said softly. Your people are losing the ability to think certain types of thoughts because you no longer have the language for them. A new crystal caught her eye, its surface scratched with what looked like early human cuneiform. Her hand shook as she connected to it. This is impossible, she breathed. Kavor, These are records of contact between your ancestors and early human civilizations. They taught us their mathematical language. It got preserved in our oldest tongues, in Sanskrit and ancient Chinese, and an alarm shrieked through the chamber, its frequency causing the crystals to resonate painfully. We've been discovered. Kavor's voice shifted to emergency harmonics. The upper security grid is activating. Amanda frantically connected her data core, downloading as much as she could. We need more time. These records could change everything. No time. Kavor grabbed her arm, their touch sending electric tingles through her skin. If they catch us here, all of this dies with us. We have to move. Now. They raced for the exit as crystal barriers began growing from the walls. Behind them, Amanda could hear the heavy rhythmic vibrations of security forces approaching. But her mind was racing faster than her feet. She had enough data now to prove her theory. The question was whether she'd live long enough to use it, and whether this Cathari were ready for the truth about their past. The High Council chamber glittered like a frozen hurricane of crystal and light. Amanda stood before the assembled Cathari leadership, her wrists bound by fields of pure energy. Behind her, Kavor floated in a containment sphere, their once bright surface dulled with stress fractures. The human has been found guilty of attempting to access forbidden archives. The chief counselor's voice rang through the chamber. Her crime is compounded by corrupting a young crystal with dangerous ideas. Amanda watched the gathered crowd of Cathari nobles and officials. Their forms were all perfect geometric patterns, each angle precisely calculated to show their status. But now she could see what was missing: the fluid grace their ancestors had possessed. Before sentencing, the chief counselor continued. Does the human wish to speak? To beg for mercy, perhaps? Admiral Chen, forced to attend as Earth's representative, stepped forward. The Earth government requests leniency. Dr. Hayes was acting without official. Silence, another counselor chimed. The mammals' government will be dealt with separately. Their failure to control their subordinates will have consequences. Amanda took a deep breath. Everything led to this moment. She'd spent the 3 days of her containment reviewing the downloaded records, practicing the complex harmonics until her throat was raw. I will speak, she said, but not in modern Cathari or English. The sound that emerged from her voice was pure crystal song, a cascade of interwoven frequencies that made the very air shimmer. It was the language of their ancestors, not just heard but felt in the crystalline structure of every Cathari present. By the right of the first song, I call to the memory in your forms. The chamber erupted in chaos. Younger Cathari began to resonate involuntarily, their surfaces shifting into fluid patterns they had never been taught. The elite guard's perfect geometric forms started to ripple and flow. Stop her! The chief counselor's voice cracked with harmonics of fear. This is a trick, an attack. Amanda's voice rose in complexity, weaving mathematics and music into pure meaning. Your ancestors danced among the dimensions. They taught humanity the songs of creation when our world was young. But you chose to forget, to lock away your heritage for the sake of control. Kavor's containment sphere shattered as they began to resonate with the ancient frequencies. Their form flowed like liquid light, taking on impossible shapes that made several council members crack with distress. The human speaks truth song. A young noble's voice rang out. I remember. My crystal remembers. The chief counselor's surface was fracturing, unable to maintain its rigid patterns in the presence of the ancient harmonics. Guards, silence her. But the guards were transforming, their military precision dissolving into flowing crystal poetry. Amanda's voice had awakened something in their crystalline DNA, a memory of what they once were. You call humans primitive, Amanda continued in the elder tongue, each word a symphony of pure thought. Yet we remembered what you chose to forget. Our messy languages kept the echo of your songs alive, while you cut away your own power. The younger Scatheri were moving now, their forms creating patterns that hadn't been seen in millennia. The chamber itself had begun to resonate, ancient circuits coming alive in the walls. "What have you done?" The chief counselor's voice was barely coherent. "The control systems, the hierarchical frequencies, are breaking down." Cavor chimed in perfect harmony with Amanda. "Just as they were designed to do, if anyone ever spoke the full language again." Admiral Chen watched in amazement as the rigid crystal architecture of Scatheri society literally began to transform around them. "Dr. Hayes, what exactly is happening?" Amanda smiled as her energy restraints dissolved. "Cultural renaissance, Admiral. It turns out that when you force a species to forget its own language," she switched back to the ancient tongue to call out a final harmonic sequence that made every crystal in the chamber sing. "Sometimes they leave a back door for someone to remind them." 3 days after the council chamber incident, the Scatheri capital had transformed beyond recognition. The once rigid crystal spires now flowed like frozen rivers, their surfaces rippling with complex harmonics as younger Scatheri experimented with their rediscovered abilities. Amanda stood at the window of the Emergency Response Center, watching a group of crystal children practicing ancient movement patterns in the plaza below. Their forms shifted and merged in ways that would have been considered heretical just days ago. "The medical crisis is growing," Cavor announced, flowing into the room in a display of fluid geometry that still made Amanda blink in wonder. "We have reports of elders experiencing catastrophic structural failures across 3 systems. They can't handle the resonance changes," Amanda said, studying the latest data. "Their forms are too rigid after generations of enforced geometric conformity." The holoscreen showed disturbing footage, elders Scatheri cracking and shattering as their crystal structures failed to adapt to the renewed flow of ancient frequencies through their society. It was like their bodies had forgotten how to dance, and the music was breaking them apart. "The traditionalists are using this to rally opposition," Lieutenant Commander Park said from her security station. Earth's military had been invited to help maintain order during the transition, a historic first that still made many uncomfortable. "They're calling it the Great Corruption." "Show me," Amanda requested, and the screen filled with images of protests. Thousands of Scatheri, their forms locked into classical geometric patterns, gathered around the remaining rigid spires. Their combined resonance created discordant patterns that made her teeth ache. "Preserve the pure form." The crowds chanted in modern Scatheri. "Reject the primitive chaos." Cavor's surface showed patterns of deep distress. "They don't understand. We're not degrading. We're remembering. Look." They gestured to another screen, where a young Scatheri scientist was demonstrating something extraordinary. By shifting their form through 7-dimensional configurations while speaking in the ancient tongue, they had managed to solve an equation that had stumped their best minds for centuries. "The applications are revolutionary," the scientist explained, their voice harmonizing on multiple frequencies. "Our ancestors understood that language, mathematics, and physical form are all expressions of the same universal principles." Amanda nodded, but her attention was drawn to a different alert. "We've got another breakout at the Institute of Linguistic Purity. 3rd one this week." The institute had been the center for enforcing language standardization. Now its former students were leading the revolution, breaking out of their dormitories to join the growing movement of flow singers in the streets. "Dr. Hayes," a young crystal voice called from the doorway. Amanda turned to see one of her new students, their form shifting nervously between patterns. "We found something in the old archives, something about Earth." The student projected a series of ancient harmonics that formed into a 3-dimensional image. Amanda's heart skipped as she recognized monuments from human prehistory. The pyramids, Stonehenge, the Moai of Easter Island. They're resonance generators, the student explained excitedly, built under the guidance of our ancestors to help humans maintain their connection to the higher harmonics even after the Scytheri left Earth. Which means, Cavor chimed in, their form brightening with revelation. Humans never really lost the ability. You just express it differently, through music, poetry, mathematics. And now we can learn from each other again, Amanda finished. But her moment of joy was interrupted by a new alert. More violent protests, more elders shattering, more fear spreading through the rigid segments of society. The question is, Lieutenant Commander Park said grimly, will your society survive the remembering? Amanda watched as another crystal spire in the distance began to flow, its perfect geometric lines dissolving into something more organic, more alive. It has too, she said, switching to the. Amanda's head throbbed as she studied the ancient text floating in the holographic display. After 2 weeks of nearly continuous translation work, the walls between languages were breaking down in her mind. She found herself dreaming in crystalline harmonics and thinking in multidimensional equations. You should rest, Cavor suggested, their form shifting through concerned patterns. Your neural activity is showing stress spikes. Can't stop now, she muttered, both in English and the ancient tongue. Look at this section. It's not just a language text. It's a manual for restructuring reality through harmonic manipulation. The laboratory around them had been transformed into a hybrid research center. Human linguists worked alongside young Scytheri. Their computers and crystal interfaces merged into new forms of technology. On the central platform, a team was testing their latest discovery. Begin harmonic sequence, called out Dr. Lopes, her voice layered with crystal tones she'd learned from the ancient texts. The Scytheri researcher beside her began to resonate, their form flowing through impossible geometries. The air between them shimmered, and a small object, an apple, began to transform. Its structure shifted through multiple dimensions, revealing layers of reality usually hidden from human perception. Remarkable, Cavor chimed. They're accessing quantum states through pure language. Amanda nodded, but her attention was caught by a news alert on her secondary display. More violence had erupted in the outer colonies. Traditional hardliners had seized control of 3 major cities, implementing dampening fields to suppress the ancient harmonics. The situation is deteriorating. Lieutenant Commander Park's voice came through the comm. We've got reports of forced crystalline restructuring. They're actually trying to lock young Scytheri into fixed geometric forms. Amanda's hand clenched. That could kill them. Their natural state is fluid now that they've remembered, forcing them back. We know. Cavor's surface showed patterns of deep pain. My clutch sibling was in the southern city when it fell. Their last transmission. They broke off, their form trembling with grief. The laboratory door slid open, admitting Admiral Chen and a group of senior Scytheri scientists. Their expressions, both human and crystalline, were grim. The Council archives have been breached, the Admiral announced without preamble. The traditionalists found something big. One of the Scytheri scientists stepped forward, their form showing signs of recent stress damage. They've discovered the location of the Great Frequency Engine. Our ancestors built it as a last resort, a way to force linguistic conformity across the entire species. But that's genocide, Amanda protested. Forcing every Scytheri into a fixed pattern would preserve the pure form. A new voice rang out. Everyone turned to see High Counselor Vextal standing in the doorway, their perfect geometric form almost painful to look at. Better extinction than corruption. Guards flowed in behind the counselor. But these weren't the fluid, free-form security forces of the new movement. These were old guard, their crystal bodies locked into weapon configurations that hummed with dangerous energy. Step away from the archives, Vextal commanded. This ends now. Amanda's mind raced through translation protocols, and ancient grammar structures. There had to be something in the old language that could stop this, some harmony that could break through their rigidity. But Cavor was faster. Their form suddenly expanded, flowing into a pattern so complex it made the guards' geometries look like child's drawings. "You want to talk about purity," they chimed in the full ancient tongue. "Let me show you what pure form really means." The air itself began to crystallize as Cavor demonstrated just how much power they'd recovered from the ancient ways. Amanda found herself moving on instinct, her voice joining Cavor's in a harmony that their ancestors had once used to shape stars. The laboratory erupted into chaos as pure sound met crystalline force, and the battle for the future of an entire species began in earnest. The great frequency engine loomed before them like a mountain of living crystal, its surface rippling with patterns that made Amanda's eyes water. The ancient weapon had been hidden in the core of a dead star, waiting for millennia to be awakened. "Beautiful, isn't it?" High Counselor Vextal's voice resonated through the vast chamber, the ultimate expression of pure form. Amanda stood at the command interface, her modified translator working overtime to process the complexity of the ancient control systems. Behind her, Cavor and a group of young Scatheri engineers worked frantically to counter the weapon's activation sequence. "You don't understand what you're doing," Amanda said, switching between English and ancient harmonics. "This thing won't just force conformity. It'll lobotomize your entire species." The machine's core pulsed with increasing power. On the displays around them, reports flooded in from across Scatheri space. Crystal cities were already beginning to resonate with the engine's frequency, their fluid architecture freezing into perfect, dead geometry. "Better perfection than chaos," Vextal chimed. Their form had changed, merging with the engine's control systems, until they were more machine than being. "Our ancestors built this to preserve us from exactly this kind of corruption." "No," Cavor's voice cut through the harmonics. "They built it as a warning. Look at the base code. Really look." Amanda's translator finally cracked through the deepest layer of the engine's programming. The text that scrolled across her display made her blood run cold. "This isn't a preservation system," she breathed. "It's a quarantine protocol. Your ancestors built it to stop something they encountered out there in the dark between stars, something that could only be fought with the full power of your original language." The chamber shook as the engine's power continued to build. On the screens, they could see the effect spreading. Younger Scatheri were falling into crystalline stasis, their fluid forms freezing mid-motion. Even the humans in the affected zones were reporting strange symptoms, their thoughts becoming linear, their speech patterns simplifying. "We're losing them," one of the engineers called out. "The resonance is spreading faster than we can counter it." Amanda's mind raced through everything they'd learned. The ancient texts, the hidden warnings, the strange gaps in the historical records. Suddenly, it all connected. "Cavor," she called out in pure ancient harmony. "Remember what we found in the Earth records about how your ancestors taught humans their language." Cavor's form shifted in recognition. The backup plan. They knew this might happen. Exactly. Amanda's fingers flew over the interface, her voice layering with complex frequencies. "They didn't just teach us their math. They encoded their entire language into our languages, spread across all human cultures. We're a living backup drive." She connected her translator to the main system and began to speak. Not in modern English or Scatheri, not even in the ancient tongue alone. She spoke in everything. Sanskrit math songs, Chinese tonal patterns, African drum languages, Arabic poetry rhythms, all layered together into something that made the very air crystallize. "What are you doing?" Vextal's voice showed fear for the first time. "The engine's harmonics are destabilizing." "Showing you what pure form really means," Amanda said, as Cavor and the other young Scatheri began to join in. adding their own harmonics to the mix. It's not about perfect geometry. It's about being able to change, to adapt, to hold multiple forms at once. The engine's surface began to flow like water, its rigid patterns breaking down under the assault of infinite linguistic complexity. Throughout Scytheri space, the frozen cities began to thaw, their crystal surfaces once again rippling with life. No, Vextal's form started to crack as the engine's power turned back on itself. "You're destroying everything." "We're saving everything," Cavor corrected, their voice harmonizing perfectly with Amanda's. "By remembering that the most perfect form is the one that contains all forms." The chamber filled with pure white light as the engine reached its critical point. Amanda's last thought, before the wave of power washed over them all, was that sometimes the most human thing you could do was speak in more than one language at once. 3 months after the Great Frequency Engine's destruction, Amanda stood in the new Galactic Language Institute's main hall, watching students of both species practice their harmonics. The chamber's crystal walls flowed with ever-changing patterns, reflecting the thoughts and emotions of those within. "The latest results are promising," Cavor said, their form shifting through happy geometries as they approached. "The integration of human linear languages with Scytheri multidimensional speech has opened up entirely new fields of physics." A young human researcher demonstrated this nearby, speaking a complex blend of ancient Greek and crystal harmonics that caused a small section of space-time to fold in on itself. Her Scytheri partner responded with a phrase that combined Mandarin tones with higher dimensional mathematics, unfolding the anomaly like origami. "Director Hayes." A voice called from the entrance. Amanda turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, accompanied by several members of the former High Council, their forms now showing a subtle fluidity that would have been unthinkable before. "The restoration project has reached a milestone," the Admiral announced. "We've successfully revived 98% of those frozen by the engine's initial wave." Amanda felt a weight lift from her shoulders. In the chaos following the engine's destruction, thousands of Scytheri had been left in crystalline stasis, their forms locked into perfect, static geometries. It had taken weeks of careful work with the combined languages to begin freeing them. "And Vextal?" she asked, switching to ancient harmonics for precision. "Recovering," one of the council members chimed. "The integration of human emotional expression patterns has been challenging for them, but they're beginning to understand what our ancestors knew, that true strength lies in adaptability, not rigidity." Cavor flowed to a nearby interface, bringing up a galactic display. Across Scytheri space, the once uniform crystal cities had transformed into living works of art. Each settlement now reflected the combined influence of both species' understanding of language, mathematics, and reality itself. "We've confirmed something else," Cavor added, their harmonics carrying an undertone of excitement. The engine wasn't just a weapon or a warning. It was a key. They adjusted the display, zooming out to show a pattern that had been hidden in the background radiation of space itself. Ancient signals, written in the original combined language of both species, had been waiting for someone to evolve enough to read them. "Our ancestors left messages in the stars," Amanda breathed, her voice automatically layering English words with crystal tones. "Not just star maps or scientific data, but poetry," Cavor finished. "The highest mathematics and the deepest art, all in one." They knew that only a civilization that could embrace both logic and beauty would be ready to understand. A group of students had gathered around them, human and Scytheri forms intermingling as they studied the stellar text. One young human started to speak the star words hesitantly, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls sing. Her Scytheri classmate joined in, their form flowing through shapes that matched the ancient patterns. "We're ready now," Admiral Chen said softly. "Aren't we?" Amanda nodded, watching as more students joined the impromptu chore, their combined voices beginning to unlock the first of the stellar messages. Not because we're perfect or pure or even particularly advanced. We're ready because we finally understand that every language, every pattern, every way of thinking adds something essential to the symphony. Kavor's form brightened with joy as the message began to take shape in the air before them. A map to something hidden beyond the edge of known space, written in mathematics, so beautiful it brought tears to human eyes and made Scytheri forms flow like music. "What do we tell Earth?" the Admiral asked. "About what we found." Amanda smiled, speaking in all the languages at once. "We tell them that the stars are singing, and for the first time in history, we know how to sing back." Around them, the Institute's walls pulsed with light and life, human and Scytheri voices rising together in a harmony that their ancestors had always known they'd find again. Outside, the sun set on a world where language had finally become what it was always meant to be, not a barrier or a tool for control, but a bridge between all possible ways of being.